So this is where our first one is located.
We're in an old boat shed at the edge of Lake Waihola. The little jetty off to the side of it provides a structure that Chris has attached one of the loggers to.
These logging devices, they log conductivity, which is a measure of salinity or the amount of seawater coming into the lake, and water height, so we can pick up that tidal fluctuation. They're taking measurements every 10 minutes, so they only have enough memory to really last for about 4 months. So every 4 months we've got to come download the data and then put them back in the water.
And that's the task for today, and you've got 6 loggers?
Yeah, we've got 6 loggers out. So we take some measurements. So we want to do a spot measurement of water height and conductivity and temperature so that we can calibrate our loggers to that data. And then, we'll redeploy them.
The 6 loggers are in different parts of the wetland. By detecting pressure changes, they determine water levels, which change with the tide, while the conductivity measurements gives an indication of how salty or brackish the water is. And why collect all this data?
Down here at these wetlands, you wouldn't really know it, but we're actually really close to sea level, probably centimetres above sea level. And even though we're quite far inland, about 10 kilometres or so. So with climate change, we know that the sea levels are going to rise, and by the end of this century, sea levels might be up to 80 centimetres higher than what they are now. So a small change in sea level rise is going to have a dramatic effect on these wetlands. So these wetlands, they're already experiencing some tidal input and salinity changes, and they're brackish already. But the question really is about what's going to happen under that scenario of 80 centimetres of sea level rise, or what are these wetlands going to look like in another 100 years?
A big question, and one that might have carbon emission implications.
Wetlands in general, they're really good at capturing carbon from the atmosphere and burying that carbon and locking it away. So, if the sea level rises here and the wetlands start to erode because we get these bigger tides, bigger storm events, all that carbon is going to be lost, and so that becomes an emission essentially. So that's another key concern we have.
Maybe it'll be fine. The wetland might grow at the same rate as the erosion, and there'll be no net change. Chris is using other data about the bathymetry of the lake and changes in sedimentation to investigate this. Maybe it will flip to a salt marsh, which is also a good carbon burial system. But this would be good to know because the other impact is obviously that conditions will change for the local inhabitants.
This wetland in particular is a really important habitat for giant kakapo and inanga, and both of those species require that kind of tidal interface to complete their life cycle. So they're living up in the freshwater reaches of the catchment, but they migrate down to these areas here where you get the first kind of hint of the seawater coming in, and that's where they like to spawn. So when the sea level's rising here, that marine freshwater interface is going to move further upstream. So we want to be able to predict that and start doing restoration work further upstream so that those fisheries are supported and those native fish populations have somewhere to go to continue their life cycle.
As for this lakeside site, it's not really the healthiest looking. The water looks super murky, and you can probably hear the beeping in the background. Around Lake Waihola are some bare hills, others covered with pine, and a big site under development where a digger is hard at work.
We're seeing a lot of impacts from surrounding land use in this lake. It is slowly filling up with sediment. Probably once had a nice gravelly bottom and was quite a lot deeper than what we see today. So a lot of the vegetation clearing that occurred in the 1800s is probably still ongoing and introducing sediments into this lake. And then also there's some water quality issues to do with a lot of the urban development that's occurring around here and a lot of wastewater ending up in the lake. So a lot of residents will know that you don't go in the water very often in summer in particular. There's a lot of water quality issues.
Of course, this lake, this wetland complex, is all part of an even bigger picture. The whole massive area of the Taiari River catchment. And that's part of Chris's role, working on a doc program called Na'awa. It's a whole catchment approach to river restoration, a national program that's looking at 14 rivers across the Motu.
What we did when we started the Ngāawa program here is we developed a partnership with the local rūnaka, so Puketaraki and Otago, and also brought in the Otago Regional Council. And so we're all the 4 agencies here are co-leading this mahi. We started a group, we called it Te Mana o Tairi, and the vision of the project's to increase the mana of the river.
And in terms of the 3 years that you've been working on this, what kind of things have you been doing?
So there's been a lot of relationship building going on. We've been kind of leveraging a little bit off the 2 big Jobs for Nature projects here and helping where we can. We've done a lot of baseline biodiversity survey, so trying to understand what biodiversity values we have in this catchment. And they're pretty outstanding. If we're just looking at native fish, we're probably the most diverse catchment in the country for galaxids and maybe native fish in general. There's a lot of non-migratory galaxids that call this catchment home, and they're mostly only found in this one catchment, which is pretty unique. So we've done a lot of that baseline biodiversity stuff. Looking at Concannon has been another focus, where they are, how many are left. So we've started that program. We've also done a lot of work to try and understand the impacts of climate change, and so that we can build a plan that makes the place more resilient to the effects of climate change. So by that I mean we want to try and influence people doing work here to do things that make them more resilient to what we predict the changing climate will look like. And we've also set up a monitoring program, so to try and pick up those effects from land use and climate change and try and understand the health of the awa.
And I mean, the catchment is a massive area, so biodiversity abundance and also some really unique ecosystems, right?
Yeah, so it's a 5,700 square kilometre catchment, about 300 kilometres of waterway, of river, just of the main stem, so that's New Zealand's 4th longest river, trivia fact. And the place is super unique, not only in terms of its biodiversity, but the ecosystems that we find here. So we've got, if we're just looking at wetlands by themselves, we've got these amazing alpine wetlands that are located on top of those flat rolling central Otago tussock-clad hills that we see. Those are super critical to absorbing water and getting water into those creeks during those really dry periods that we have down here. So they keep the tap on, so to speak. And then underneath those we have the scroll plain, which is New Zealand's only scroll plain. It's the largest kind of intact scroll plain system in the southern hemisphere.
And when you say scroll plain, Can you just describe for me what that is?
I guess if anyone's ever flying into Invercargill, they should look out the window when they're flying over central Otago. You'll get this amazing view of the scroll plain. It's really hard to appreciate from ground level, but when you get up high, you'll see a river that's meandering through a pretty flat landscape. It creates a whole big mosaic of wetlands because as the river meanders and floods, it will create oxbows and the river course will change. So it's really just this really flat plain that's got this incredible meandering, winding river system through it. And it's quite large. It's about 40 kilometres long.
And I mean, we've been talking today about some of the challenges that are facing this area here near the mouth of the Taiari, like the wetland here. Can you talk to me a bit about the challenges maybe further up in the Taiari?
If we're just thinking about impacts from climate change, it's a tale of 2 stories in this catchment. So the upper part of the river we suspect will get hotter and drier. We're going to see less snowfall, less frosts. All of those things are going to influence the hydrology of the river up there. We might start to see those wetlands dry up. So there's an ongoing question in terms of how do we best manage this place. It's a pretty complex mosaic of wetlands that has been grazed now for a couple of hundred years. So we need to begin to understand how to manage that land.
Thanks to Dr. Chris Kavavos, Freshwater Technical Advisor at the Department of Conservation. This episode was produced by me, Claire Concannon, with help from Ellen Rikers. Sound engineering was by William Saunders. To never miss an episode, remember to follow and listen to Our Changing World on your favourite podcast app. I'm Claire Concannon. Thanks so much for listening. Kia pai, te wiki.